We asked the question, were you happy with the campaign results? Yes or no? Even people who didn't hit their stated goal still said they were happy with the results. 96% of the people said, yeah, this was a success to us, even if they were, as low as 75% of the goal attained. Some people were way over, 120% of the goal attained. So of course they were happy. But that was sort of edifying to us. Difficult times. And there's always something that dominates each year.
Welcome to Philanthropy Geek, and today I have good friend Steven Shattuck. Hello, Steven.
Hey, Don, how's it going?
It's going well, and I have interviewed Steven before, back pre-pandemic. Everything is pre or post, right? I had a podcast called You've Got This, Fundraising for the Beginner Fundraiser, and you gave us some really great insight, and you talked about the book that you were writing. And Steven now is with Capital Campaign Pro, amazing group, and I love your guys' podcast with Andrea and Amy. I've been a subscriber for that for a long time, and I was delighted to see you had joined them. But your book, can you give us the title of your book? It's so fun.
Yeah, Robots Make Bad Fundraisers, which has really become maybe even more important in this AI world we now live in, right, since we last talked.
Right. You've been not just timely, but super important with that title. It's a great book, and you should all check it out, library or otherwise. But Steven is well known within the industry for his research and his background ability and to test. He's the testing guru. And he has launched something with Capital Campaign Pro, which is 2 years worth of research around capital campaigns in particular. And that's what we're really going to talk about today. But could you tell us a little bit about what put you in the place of doing the research, and then how it came about that you ended up publishing 2 years worth so far?
Yeah, well, first, thanks for having me again, Dawn. It's awesome to chat with you.
My pleasure.
Love the pod, of course. And yeah, when I joined Capital Campaign Pro, like you said, I kind of came to the organization having done a lot of industry research. I was at Bloomerang for a long time. Love Bloomerang. They're still doing a lot of really, really new and interesting research, even since I left, which is great. People should check that out. But we were doing research into donor retention, online giving. I was involved a little bit with the Fundraising Effectiveness Project, which Bloomerang was a big supporter of, that looked at donor retention in the sector. And so when I joined Capital Campaign Pro, my antenna was kind of up, like, well, what's the latest research into capital campaigns? That was actually something I looked into as I was sort of, interviewing and getting ready to join the company. And couldn't find much, which was a little surprising to me because, capital campaigns are such a major discipline in fundraising. Certainly there's there's a lot of capital campaigns going on at any given moment. And so I said to Amy and Andrea, like, hey, we could probably own this space if you were willing to do it. And them being kind of the forward-thinking founders that they are, they said, yeah, great, go ahead and do it. So we started from scratch and reached out to our list and just asked them a bunch of questions about their campaigns, where they are in the process, asked our clients as well, and got a great response. So we're actually rather quickly able to kind of fill that gap in the sector, because that was maybe one of the last remaining places where we didn't have a lot of research, right? There's a lot of great online giving, donor retention, major gifts research. That's something that Amy was part of a few years ago. But the sector it seemed like just sort of relying on case studies, anecdotes, and all that stuff is great. And hopefully people keep making those because it's really important, but we're kind of missing that third, leg of the stool, if you will, on just kind of hard empirical data. So that's what we did. And we've done the report twice now. In fact, we're recording this in March of 25. And I'm gearing up for the third survey. And it's just been a great to be able to kind of deliver that to the sector, and alleviate a lot of fears. That was kind of our main goal with the study is, capital campaigns are kind of scary, and for good reason. But now there's something people can look at and say, okay, this is what people tend to deal with. This is how they approach things. This is how they overcome things. And we can do that too.
Right. It's so important. And capital campaigns are so interesting because they use that other data, but they're a very specific point in time.
Yeah.
big launch. And so they have things where they're pulling it all together, and you still have your annual campaign. And I just love that you have some really great thoughts around that. But I do like to talk about some current things that
Yes.
might influence our own worries, and where your answers will
Hmm.
help us alleviate some of those worries.
Yes.
Right now in our news cycle, we are dealing with quite a bit of uh, political upheaval around funding,
Yeah.
quite honestly. Whether you are working in, you've got, like, I know of a nonprofit personally that has a very large grant from a HUD grant
Mm.
that will help with a domestic violence shelter, and then the capital campaign going with it. But it's secure for now,
Yeah.
but you have to think, and it's worrisome to the
Right.
organization. Another organization, Head Starts, they have had their funding cut, and so far some of them at least still have not had that stream turned back on. And so Head Starts are really connecting with their foundations that have supported them, and they're seeing how they might. It's worrisome. So that's two
Yeah.
different types of funding. One's a grant, and the other one is a steady stream of federal funding
Right.
that was stopped right away in the process. The third thing that people are talking about is the increase already of all both Republican and Democrat and independent. They are fundraising already.
Yeah.
And we expect that in election years, close to election, not to
Not a
interrupt,
normal year. Right.
people's pocketbooks opening for political. We kind of look at that time frame, don't we?
Right.
When we're doing capital campaigns and annual campaigns. And here it is right away
Yeah.
already. So those three things within our news cycle are
Yeah.
worrisome. And we're looking for some answers. And I saw your research, and I thought that is perfect for what we, some reassurance
Yeah.
as we move forward, and learning a lot from what you've done with your report, which I've pulled up here, and I don't mean to not look, but I
That's
have to
okay.
read. I have to read.
Yeah.
Okay, so one, here's some of the best and brightest moments out of your current research. I'll start with number one: capital campaigns are even more successful than previously thought. Tell me
Yeah.
a little bit about what you found out there.
Yeah, well, I love the preface to your question because the study was really kind of born out of this concept, right? The number one thing, maybe not the number one thing, but maybe in the top three thing that we get asked as an agency is, is now a good time to do a capital campaign?
Right.
Because of all the headwinds, if that's maybe the right word to describe what we're going through now that you mentioned. But when we first did the research in kind of early 2023, we were still pretty much in the thick of the pandemic, right? And in a lot of ways, it's still not even over. And that was something that was top of mind. And then last year, it was the election, of course. And now this year, as I go into the next survey here in a few weeks, it'll be exactly all the things that you just described. But the point is, there's always something. I wish there wasn't something. It seems like we're always now we're stuck in just a continual phase of bad news, right? That affects maybe how donors are perceived and how we fundraise. But we asked about this head on. So we asked about success rates for sure. And in the 2 years we've done the study, you nailed it exactly. Overwhelming satisfaction rate. We asked the question, were you happy with the campaign results? Yes or no. Even people who didn't hit their stated goal still said they were happy with the results.
Really?
96% of the people said, yeah, this was a success to us, even if they were as low as 75% of the goal attained. Some people were way over, 120% of the goal attained. So of course they were happy. But that was sort of edifying to us. Difficult times. And there's always something that dominates each year. Hopefully there will only be one thing, but it kind of seems like there's multiple things now, right?
Right.
You can still be successful. And so along with that, another question we asked is, in the first research study, did you pause because of the pandemic? Did you pause this campaign because of economic uncertainty? That was sort of sandwiched between the pandemic and the election. Was, are we going to have a recession? Is it going to be a soft landing, inflation? And most people, 70 to 80% of people said, no, we didn't pause. We kept going. And that really encouraged me because, it would be such a shame if you had a clear need, a clear case for support, a supporting donor community to say, well, maybe we should pause this campaign because we don't know, is it going to come off as insensitive with people, going through tough economic times? And that just doesn't bear out in reality. When you do that, you're really sidelining yourself. It's not, you can ask and get a no, but if you don't ask, you're not going to get anything, right? So we tell people, no, keep going. There's never going to be a good time to do a capital campaign. It's maybe a crude metaphor, but one thing as a younger person, people said to me a lot is there's never a good time to have children. And it's kind of the same thing, right? You can never necessarily get all those pieces in place exactly how you want them, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't go ahead, especially if you have a great need. If you need a new roof, if your programs need to expand, go. And so we were saying this pre-research, but now we have the data to back it up from over 500 organizations across the US and Canada. Very few are our clients. It's just kind of the sector overall. So keep going. But then another thing to answer your question, lastly, is we asked people this year, hey, did all of these headwinds negatively impact your campaign? And a majority of people said no. Now, that doesn't mean that they weren't affected, but it didn't derail the campaign. So I'm not saying, be Pollyannish or expect that you're not going to have to deal with any of these issues. You will, but don't let it stop the campaign, because most people don't let it stop them. And most people are very successful, which is what you said at the beginning.
Right. I agree that totally. I raised some issues, but it might be just the issue that you're in a relatively smaller town and two other major organizations are running a capital campaign while you do. That's a problem.
Yeah.
But just keep going.
Yeah.
That's what I'm hearing you say. Persistence wins the day, resilience. It's if you give up, you've lost. You've given up, right? If
you decide for the donor, you've decided for them. Let them decide.
Right. And I always point out, because I do work in a predominantly rural, larger area in the middle of the United States. I have seen your lists. I've seen the ones down the roads list. I've seen around the road the other direction lists because I've worked with them. And you don't have the same people.
No,
they think they have the same people because they have one or two major donors that have really deep pockets, and they do the big check and it makes the news.
Yes.
But your real list that funds you, I've seen them and they're not the same people. And that shocked me. So everybody has their group of people who are highly concerned about them.
Yes.
Right. And the things you support may be similar to mine, but probably not.
Yeah,
I have my personal things that I support. I know I've listened to Andrea on your podcast, and she supports some very particular things that she talks about. And they're not even close to what I support, right?
Yeah.
And so each one of us have our guiding force. So don't give up, because your people are still there and they care deeply about you. And then that leads to the annual funds. So what did you find out about annual funds, and how do you make sure that I'm going to give annual fund and I'm going to give to your capital campaign?
This in many ways is like the core of the research, because when I first floated the idea to Amy and Andrea, the first thing that they said we absolutely must ask about is the annual fund. And me, as sort of a capital campaign novice at the time, I didn't have a sense for this, but there is a sort of a preconceived notion among people who are planning a capital campaign that the annual fund is gonna suffer no matter what. It's just table stakes. It's gonna happen, but we'll recover over time and it'll be worth it. But it's gonna happen. And again, prior to the research, we would say to them, no, that's not necessarily true. You know, a consultant will put things into place to protect the annual fund, if not grow it during a campaign. You know, you don't have to be worried. But we wanted, again, to just put this to rest with hard empirical data. So we asked people, hey, what happened to your annual fund both during the campaign and in the ensuing years after the campaign? And again, overwhelming majority of people, between 2/3 to 3/4 of people, said that it either increased or stayed the same. And a lot of people said that it increased, almost a third of people. So capital campaigns, again, not a foregone conclusion that your annual fund is going to suffer. It can suffer if you don't do certain things, for sure, to protect it, but it doesn't have to happen. And a lot of people are actually able to grow it. Sometimes the capital campaign can be a catalyst for annual fund growth. You know, a lot of, you know, something that's growing and maybe in popularity is comprehensive campaigns, which of course include the annual fund in the goal. That's the, you know, that's sort of a quick way to get around this, but you know, doesn't have to happen. So that was kind of a myth that we busted, that we were very happy. And now, you know, the first year of the research is always, you're always kind of nervous because you get the data and then you think, okay, is this going to be the data the second year? And it held really steady. So we, you know, that was kind of a nice edifying moment for me. And it seems like that is the case for the sector, that the annual fund not only stays the same, but can grow in many cases.
Well, I think it, from my experience, and you're right, it's a myth that people hold on to. The consultants say, we say to them, no, you're going to grow.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to grow, especially if you handle your database correctly. That, I think, is the key why not everyone is growing. It's remarkable how very few nonprofits really take time to deal with their donor management.
Yeah.
You came from Bloomerang,
You're
you
speaking
know,
my language.
right? They and that's why I met you, and I love Bloomerang and
Yes.
other donor management software, is because you've got to deal with that database. You've got to grow, and you have new donors. That's the thing about a capital campaign. You're going to meet new people.
Yeah.
But you have to build that relationship. They may give because someone asked them to give. That's a relationship between the board member maybe and them, not you and them. But then that donor management software, you have to build that relationship, and they're going to be a regular donor more often than not if you keep them in the loop and make them care deeply about their donation they made before and what it's doing. And that is, I love the numbers. That's really my jam, is building your database, building your community, and teaching people how to use their donor management software efficiently and growing. So to know that a third, there's a lot of room for growth there.
Sure.
Because that's what's going on. I believe wholeheartedly.
Yes.
2/3 are not using their donor management software.
Yeah.
Or don't even have one sometimes. They have a spreadsheet. Yeah, that's really interesting. And I really appreciate that. And the stronger relationships is so important. And it leads us, nice segue, right over to feasibility studies.
Yeah.
and prove their worth, because it is about stronger relationships.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what did you find out about feasibility studies? Because that scares people.
Yeah,
for
sure. And this is sort of the one area where there's an optional step, technically, right? You know, you don't have to do a feasibility study. Right. I recommend it in most cases. There are, a handful of good reasons, circumstantially, but for the most part, it does seem to pay dividends. So we asked people, did you do a study? Yes or no? And then what I did is I compared the yeses and the nos to how they answered other questions, campaign success rate, for sure. One question I asked that was a big comparison here was, what were some of the other benefits to the campaign besides dollars raised? And we gave people kind of a menu of options, and they could select whatever thing kind of resonated with them. But there was a really interesting difference among the responses between people who said they did do a feasibility study versus the ones who didn't. So the people who did a study, they were significantly more likely, more than twice as likely, to say that major benefits to the campaign that we felt included strengthening donor relationships with major donors. So to your question exactly, Don, better fundraising systems, better staff effectiveness. So they sort of came out of the campaign having gone through a study saying, internally we kind of leveled up. Maybe it was our first campaign and thus our first study. We had never talked face to face to major donors in that context or in that way. And because we did, not only did those relationships strengthen, but our staff members built confidence. So one thing that Andrea always says is, capital campaigns can be a really good and kind of sneaky way to skill up your staff and your organization as a whole. And feasibility study is one area where this really bears out,
Right.
Because it is such a specific sort of sub-discipline within fundraising. So, again, we were always saying you should probably do a study because there's a lot of benefits. You can get a better goal. You can kind of get better feedback on your case for support. But now we also have some data that shows, hey, coming out of the campaign, you're going to be better positioned not only for the next campaign, but for ongoing major gifts, solicitation, legacy giving. All those things are going to benefit because your staff got better and you have stronger donor relationships in sort of the major cohort.
Right. And I like to make sure that smaller nonprofits understand that don't get scared by the name.
No.
A feasibility study.
Yeah.
You don't have to bring the academics in.
Yeah, it's not the best name.
No, it's a relationship survey, basically, one-on-one, chatting about asking their advice.
Yeah, absolutely.
And do they think that you're ready for a capital campaign?
Yeah.
And if they don't even really know who you are and you're asking them for a meeting and advice, that kind of answers some of your question right up front. You have some relationship building to do before you kick off the campaign.
Yeah.
And it's great. It's just a window in time, letting you know where you are,
where you stand,
and leveling up that employee base, letting them know, hey, the executive director has to offload other work to get some time to know who this person is. And it's a great thing to have. I do know some people do them in-house. That can be done well in-house.
Absolutely.
If you follow a simple set of rules. So don't let anyone tell you that you have to pay exorbitant amount of money to get it done outside. There's some really great companies like your company that are really great at feasibility study. And but sometimes you're in the kindergarten level, you're not even at the middle school yet, right? And so doing it yourself with some guidance, and it'll teach you that capital campaign's gonna happen for you.
Yes.
But it may be 2027.
Yeah, you may need to do some things.
Right. There's some things that may have to happen. And those kind of things can be accelerated, especially if there is an emergency.
Yep.
There's nothing better than an emergency to kickstart that relationship building. I worked with an organization that they had water coming in and the building because of a poorly done roof job. And so they had a replacement on the roof, but they needed guttering and other stuff. Well, we just took a lot of pictures and we started visiting. And it didn't, it kick-started the capital campaign for later on. So we used the emergency and asked to kind of do that feasibility study within the community, received enough to fix the water issue, then rolled right on into pre-capital campaign preparation. So you can do it in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But I love that you really came out with some solid information that if you do it, you're going to be stronger.
Yeah. It makes it
we can tell you that, Amy can tell you, I can tell you that but when you see the data that other people have experienced it, that's what the strength of this is.
Yeah.
So you don't need a wealthy board to be successful. I thought you had to have a couple of billionaires on your
Yeah,
board.
this is my favorite one because I'm sort of in my role on the front lines when people first reach out to us and say, hey, we're thinking about a campaign and we might need some help. And I would say multiple times a month, maybe even once a week, somebody will come to me. They'll kind of have their hat in their hand and say, well, we want to do a campaign. We have a goal in mind. We have a project that we absolutely need. Maybe the roof is leaking, like you said, Don. But they'll kind of sheepishly say, well, we have a grassroots board, or we have a community board. We don't have a bunch of rich people on our board. We have people on our board that look like the people that we serve, or maybe even used to be, and they're community members, and they're not rich doctors and business owners and lawyers. And they'll say, can we do a campaign? I almost didn't reach out to you because of this. And then I'll say, of course you can, right? I mean, you're actually
Mhm.
in a lot of ways better positioned, because I'm guessing if you have a board like that, they are super engaged. They're not just someone that is a business person just kind of trying to check a box on their LinkedIn profile by having a board seat, right? And no offense to those people, I'm sure those people do great work too when they are on boards. But I'll say to them, like, I kind of grab them by the virtual shoulders and say, no, you can do it. You're awesome. And now we have the data, which says that only about 15% on average of the dollars raised in a campaign towards a goal come from the board. So that leaves a huge chunk of money that the board is not on the hook for. And again, this is a number that stayed very consistent. I think it only
Did
changed
it?
like 0.5%.
Hmm.
And I would expect, 10 years later, if I come back, it'll still be around 14, 16%. I don't think this is something that's going to change, just because that's how the way we do things. So now, again, yeah, be motivated, especially for a smaller nonprofit. If you have the majority of the fund is going to come from your existing base of support from donors who are probably not on your board. Now, of course, if you get big gifts from your board, that's great. That can be something to kind of jumpstart things, but it's not a prohibitive factor if you don't have a bunch of wealth on your board. And I would argue that it may actually be better, because it's probably a signal that people are pretty engaged if they're there.
Right. Engaged, passion. They have a
Yep.
passion for the
They
topic
know you. Yeah.
and the mission. They have a passion for the mission and they want it solved. So they're going to be willing to go out and chat in community groups.
Yeah.
Right.
And speak about you in a way that is
Right.
authentic and heartfelt. Yeah.
Right. I think that's super important. And I love that, again, that the research bears out what the great best advice has always been, but people are like, I don't know. I
Yeah.
don't know if
Yeah.
we can do it.
Yeah.
Okay, so the 80-20 Pareto principle. So it's always the 80-20, and we
It's, yep.
lament it. We
Can't
lament
get
it.
away.
I mean, how many times have we heard it's always the same people?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But go ahead.
Yeah.
Yes, it is always the same people.
Yeah. For us, it was around 70-30, but it's close enough to the 80-20, right? I mean,
Well, that's good news. 70-30 is better
is.
than 80-20.
And it's interesting how that may shake out. There's a lot of, it seems like the Giving USA research comes out, and other studies that say there's more dollars but less donors. That seems to be the trend right now. So that 70 may creep up again to 80, but right now it's at 70, which is great. So 70% of your campaign goal is going to come from the top 20 gifts, not givers, but the gifts. So capital campaigns. And there are exceptions to this. We've helped with campaigns that were maybe a little flatter, where it was maybe a lot of sort of mid-level gifts that got there. But most capital campaigns, it seems like there's you think of that traditional gift period, there's a lead gift that's 7 figures, and then below that there's a couple of 6-figure gifts, and below that there's a few 5-figure gifts. That does seem to be how most of the time these things shake out. But again, there are people who are outliers, and that's okay, and that's to be expected. But if you're sort of a typical nonprofit, although I don't like to say that word because not everyone is typical, I think that's a fair assumption that you can make. And it goes back to your point, Dawn, like if you don't have relationships with people that can make so-called transformational gifts, those big 6-7 figure gifts, that may signal that maybe you do have a little bit of major gift work to do for a couple of years before you can do a campaign. But again, don't let that demotivate you, because there are exceptions for sure.
Well, one thing I notice, because like I said, I am that database person that
Yeah.
looks over that database and helps you build community. Um, you have every time there are people who are giving steady,
Yep.
frequent gifts
Yep.
who are capable of transformational
Yes.
level gifts,
Yes.
and they're hiding in your database.
Yeah.
You've not asked them. You've not
Yeah.
built that relationship past a $20 a month
Yeah.
donation,
But they could be a millionaire. You don't even
or
know.
even a Christmas gift of 500.
Yeah.
And if you do that level of understanding who they are,
Yeah.
you end up at a level they can make that
Yeah.
transformation. So you have the research to do within your, and that's part of that feasibility study.
Yeah.
Is you've got to look. You may not even know who you have.
Yeah.
I've seen it more often than not. You don't
Oh,
know.
all the
People say,
time.
"I know who's in my donor base," and we
Mhm.
get to digging, like, no, you don't. No, you
Yeah.
don't. You don't know who's in your donor base. Um, because you just see, it's like the millionaire next door.
Yes.
And the more Midwestern you are, the more, I think, more likely that's the
Yeah.
case. But I could be
I
wrong. It could be
agree.
the same on the coasts. I don't know. I
I'm in
just know the
Indiana. I think you're
Midwest.
right.
The millionaire next door is shockingly really next door and can make a transformational gift.
Yeah.
It's a good book to read, by the way. It's a bit on the aged side, but I still
It's
say
still
it's
relevant.
relevant. So, one thing I came to my mind, and I don't know, I don't believe that you're asking for this information, but it would be really
Mm.
interesting. Suppose you're 75% or 50% along the way.
Okay.
What does that top 20 look like at those points? And how can we use that data to predict our outcome at the end?
Yeah, so you're right. That's not something we asked in the research, but I can draw on our agency experience. So, from our sort of working perspective, and we have about 100 campaigns under advisement at any given time. We like to say you want to get to 70-80% of your goal before going public. And that way, when you do go public, you're just sort of batting cleanup from maybe small or mid-sized gifts to make up that 30 or 20%. But that's sort of our sort of goalpost for when you go public. So we definitely recommend, you should get some of the big gifts or the big pledges, and it doesn't have to be cash in hand. It can be pledged over 4 years. That's something that is one thing we did ask in the research, is that most campaigns do utilize some sort of multi-year pledge.
Right.
Sort
And
of,
the bigger groups completely
yeah.
want that.
Yeah,
Like,
it's ingrained
right.
culturally for sure. You think of higher ed, healthcare, that's a foregone conclusion. They're going to do it. But again, that's another example where maybe capital campaigns can help introduce something into the mix that they weren't doing before. Pledges being a prime example, because it is so common amongst campaigns. But in general, if you've got some lead gifts from a small group of people, that's very motivating to the rest of the public to say, hey, we're unveiling this campaign, and look, we're already 70% of the way there. We only have a little bit to go, and you can chip in. That's really where we see success for sure. And I would venture to guess the people that filled out our survey and were included in the research followed that sort of general life cycle, if that's the right way to describe it.
Another thing to think of, kind of piggyback on what you were saying there, during these times that we're in, and if there's a lot of competition, maybe we use the strategy of a 4-year pledge on some of the smaller donors.
Yeah.
Like if they gave 1,000, maybe they would pledge 1,000 for 4 years.
Yes.
And that's not something we do a lot.
No.
And maybe we start moving in that direction because, right? Because we're in a lot of competition. We talked about political competition, but other organizations are going to be turning to capital campaigns just like, you are. There are big figment of our imagination group we're talking about.
Yeah.
So suppose, we've got a nonprofit and they're really worried and they're going to turn to a capital campaign, but then they go, yeah, but so are 8 people down the road.
Yes.
So maybe we start planning that out. If they gave 1,000 or 2,000, would you pledge 4 years for that?
I love that. I mean, you think about me as sort of a typical middle class household. I got 2 kids in school. My wife and I work. If somebody asked me for a $5,000 gift, even if it was an organization that we absolutely adore, that'd be kind of hard for us. But 1,000 over 4 or 5 years, okay, that becomes doable. And if people were to look me up in their Bloomerang and saw that we've been giving $20 a month for 10 years, that's a real contextual smooth upgrade path to someone like me. And I think that's a great example of the kind of the hidden gems in the database that you mentioned before. And yeah, you don't have to just kind of let those things ride. Oh, these people they give 500 annually and that's what they've done. Like they may be screaming in a way to say, hey, we could do more, but without being asked, you don't get what you don't ask for typically.
Right.
And I know I should go in and upgrade those monthly gifts that I've been the same amount for 10 years. But, I'm busy and inertia kicks in. But if somebody called me and say, hey, can we just change you from 20 to 25 in our database? And I would say, yes, of course. I wouldn't even notice it. So I love that idea. I think that mentality could really serve not just capital campaigns, but annual funds, for almost everyone.
Right. And I think another area for that monthly donor, or perhaps the person, say they give $100 at Christmas.
Yeah.
That's a very common person in our lives. You could go to them and ask, you give 100 at Christmas. Would you consider adding or stretching out and doing, say, $20 or $40 a month?
Yeah.
And we could split that donation and keep your $100 to the annual gift, but the extra that you're donating will go to the capital campaign, and that would be your capital campaign gift. But you've spread it out like a Netflix subscription over 12 months, and they're not going to feel it.
They never notice.
But yet they're part of the capital campaign then.
Yeah. And this, going back to protecting the annual fund we were talking about before,
right?
This is the number one way we recommend you do that. Andrea calls it the double ask. And it does require the database. You have to know what this person is doing. And I always tell people, going back to my Bloomerang days, donors like it when you tell them what kind of donor they are. Hey, you're a monthly donor at this amount. Thank you. Hey, thanks so much for always giving this amount at the holidays. We really appreciate it. So, illustrate to them, what they do, and then ask. And exactly what you said is perfect. We can keep that going, but would you be willing to pitch in an extra 50 to the campaign? And then annual fund's protected, and you've got a campaign gift, and the donor, through the course of how you do that, it's a lot of stewardship, but it pays off because they're going to feel like, oh yeah, they understand, or they know what I've done. They're recognizing my support in the process of asking.
Right. Oh, that's a good strategy.
Yes.
Okay, so we've covered most of the highlights, but I do want to just kind of go over your trending as we wrap this up. So you did one last year and year before last, I should say. You did 23, then 24, and you'll be doing 25.
Yep.
What are the trends and the new insights you saw from 23 to 24?
More comprehensive campaigns, I think, because people are understanding that protecting the annual fund is not only possible, but something you should try. And I'd say the other big thing is how people conduct feasibility studies. So you mentioned, more people doing them in-house. That is growing. It's now about 1/3 of people are doing the interviews themselves, which is sort of the model we recommend, which is nice to see because that's sort of our preferred model. But there is sort of it seems like there's a trend away, and I'll keep an eye on this, and I may be proven wrong, but I hope I'm not, of kind of outsourcing those interviews. But like you said, I love what you said, doing it with guidance is very important. You don't want to just jump right into a one-on-one interview if you've never done that, because that can produce bad outcomes. But it seems like people are seeking that guidance and being bold and talking to those people themselves. And I think that's why we see donor relationship strengthening reported from people who do feasibility studies, because they're in the room and they're talking to their donors and coming out of it with an even stronger relationship. So that's something I'll keep an eye on. And then kind of layering it in, like, okay, what are the tangible results of that? Are those people more successful? Are they, reporting, higher rates of certain other things, like campaign benefits? That's what we'll be looking at for sure. Those are kind of my top two, honestly, in addition to the annual fund and, the percentage from board members. But I'm guessing those numbers are going to stay pretty steady, just like donor retention stays right around 40%. The Pareto principle mostly stays at 80-20, 2% of GDP. I think those are just kind of our sector numbers, and they're good.
Hopefully roll forward or grow a little.
And not
right. I do like to see on your list, 63% of the organizations utilized volunteer campaign chairs.
Yeah.
I think it's super important. It's a great way even to bring someone that was casually a donor, a very influential, probably donates modestly high, but they're more likely to just be the person people know who they are.
Yeah.
And they are lovely, warm individuals who step up, and they're right, and they're modestly high donation. They can sometimes be turned into a life-changing gift.
Yeah.
Because they care deeply. Their name and their face were attached.
And they can also say in the course of those conversations, like, I also give, and I give at a significant level. So they're sort of talking the talk and walking the walk, which is a good quality for the chair.
Right. I always liken them to the person, I always say, look for the person people love to say, oh, they're my friend.
Yeah.
And you're like, nobody can have that many friends.
Right.
They just communicate in a way that everybody says, I know them, and they, we're close. And you're like, really? You're close? And by the time you go, like, I think I've talked to 20 people who said that you are their
closest,
really close friend.
Yeah.
That just means that you communicate in that way.
Yeah.
Right.
You're charismatic. You're
right.
Open, nice person.
Yeah. And I thought 63% was high for that, because a lot of organizations are hesitant.
Yeah.
To ask somebody to be at that level as a volunteer.
And that was a new question. We didn't ask that in the first year. So that's another trend we'll keep an eye on.
That's good.
And you think, boy, it's only, kind of the inverse. It's only 63%. And look at our campaign success rates. Imagine how much higher the success rates would be. That would be an interesting thing to look at if it did indeed grow to 70-75%. What actual tangible benefit that would bring. And I'm guessing a significant one.
I think it would.
Yeah.
I think it would. Because it gives a trust factor to the event, and you're not, you never want to in any way, sometimes it's just perceived that the capital campaign chair is the paid employee or the executive director, which is a paid employee.
Head of school or something,
But you don't want to have that. I know of an organization who actually has an executive director that's she was actually just felt maybe she's neurodivergent, I don't know, but she did not want in any way to be a part of be the face or a part of the capital campaign. The chair of the board had to do it.
Okay.
Do you know, I think it kind of made it was unusual, right?
Yeah.
But it really did make the chair of the board and her husband became the capital campaign, the face.
Yeah.
And they're very well loved in the community, well liked. They have 2 different personal pull groups in the community. And if the executive director she is quite a forceful, and it seemed weird that she didn't want to do this because she is a very outgoing person. But some people everybody's built different, right?
Yeah.
And that was just her thing. And great for her being honest about it.
Yeah. That's true.
It really did work out well because it forced the face of the campaign were volunteers.
Yeah. which is
The executive director wasn't seen in any interview about that capital campaign.
And that can be more credible because a donor is hearing from a donor, not a staff person, to your earlier point, which can be very powerful.
It is.
Yeah.
I think it's become a successful campaign for them. I think in part because of that.
Yeah.
They'd never done anything before like it. And so their database, besides just people coming to events, was low, right? They hadn't developed it. Anyway, well, we'll wrap up there. Anything, last thoughts, things you want to share?
Well, download the research. It's on our website. It's just capitalcampaignpro.com/research. And if you do download it, you'll get the survey. And so if you do get the survey, we would love for you to add your voice to this. We doubled the data set from last year from the previous year. It'd be great if we could double it again and again kind of maintain the same rates, because I think that will give us a really clear picture of the sector. But if you're sitting here listening to this saying, gosh, that wasn't our experience at all, I want to know that, because I do want the survey to be reflective of the overall sector. So please fill it out if you get it. And if you are listening to this and you've already filled it out in the past year, update us, because that is something we do. We sort of update people if they are on a different phase of the campaign. But, bottom line is we'd love to have your voice added to this, because it's meant to help people and really kind of alleviate a lot of those fears.
Right. And an axiom in the business is garbage in, garbage out, good data in, good data out. And so you're only as good as the people allow you to be with the survey. So
yeah,
absolutely. Be a participant.
Yes, we love it.
And don't try to be a pleaser. Tell them the truth.
Yeah, please tell me the truth.
Please. Well, thank you so very much, Steven.
Yeah,
it was great to see you again. It was fun. Hopefully we've made people feel a little better about the times that we live in, and that everything is doable, right?
Yeah,
it is doable.
You can do it. Tough, but you can do it.
I know they can. And I appreciate you. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day. I appreciate you coming on Philanthropy Geek.
See you.